In the heart of the Second World War, Auschwitz mutated into an industrial slaughterhouse. Rudolf Höss laid its foundation in May 1940. By 1944, the nightmare started long before the camp. The SS packed humans into sealed cattle cars, a week without water, a week without light. The air inside turned toxic, heavy with the suffocating stench of feces and sweat. Then the heavy iron doors crashed open. Blinding daylight hit dilated pupils. Guards drove the disoriented crowds out with batons. Thousands stumbled onto the concrete platform, the ramp. Here, an officer decided human survival with a single gesture of a gloved hand, left or right. The death factory expanded to consume the endless influx. By 1943, the complex had fractured into 40 subcamps across the region. Arthur Liebehenschel briefly replaced Höss as commandant. The conveyor belt of murder never paused. Höss returned to execute a massive logistical operation. The target was the Hungarian Jews. The old infrastructure could not handle the sheer volume of incoming prisoners. To accelerate the slaughter, Nazi engineers dragged a new rail line directly into Auschwitz to Birkenau. The trains rolled straight toward the gas chambers. The system choked on its own scale. Up to 12,000 Hungarian Jews arrived every single day in 1944. This relentless human tide physically overloaded the camp capacity. The crematoria ovens burned around the clock. The selection process on the ramp became a cold mechanical reflex. Guards instantly sorted the living from the dead. There was no judge. There was no trial. The SS finalized the selections without asking a single question. 15,000 unexpected captives broke the camp. Operation Barbarossa triggered this logistical collapse on the ramp in 1941. Endless human floods poured behind the wire. How did a political prison turn into a death polygon? The system choked on thousands of new captives. Before the Eastern invasion, the scale remained strictly local, and the administration handled the numbers easily. On June 14, 1940, the first transport arrived. The SS unloaded 728 Polish prisoners who laid the bricks, built the fences, and constructed their own cages. The guards controlled the flow. The camp functioned smoothly. Then the Eastern Front opened. The trains rolled backward from the front lines. They carried entirely different cargo. Exhausted Soviet soldiers stepped onto the platform. These men had no rights. Because the Soviet Union stood outside the Geneva Convention, this legal void completely untied the hands of the SS. The guards required no paperwork for executions. Prisoners slept on the freezing mud. The barracks overflowed. Starvation became a weapon, and the administration quickly lost control over the shrinking living space. By 1942, the transport logs recorded the total influx of Soviet captives, over 15,000. Hiding 15,000 undocumented captives required a blind spot, a geographical anomaly. The Reich needed flawless logistics, and they found them in a quiet Polish province. In September 1939, German forces crushed Poland. The regime swallowed the southern territories. Here stood Auschwitz-Birkenau, a sleepy town hiding a massive strategic asset, an immense railway hub. Day and night, the heavy clatter of freight train wheels echoed across the tracks. Iron arteries connected this single point directly to every corner of Europe. The calculation was strictly bureaucratic. Dense forests hid the location from the world. The invaders did not even have to build from scratch. 22 empty brick buildings stood waiting. These abandoned army barracks of 1940 would soon become a graveyard for 1,100,000 people. Berlin erased the town's original identity. Auschwitz became Auschwitz. The blueprint lay on the table. The transport lines ran on schedule. The empty blocks awaited their human cargo. The machine only lacked a chief engineer to turn the key. In May 1940, the SS appointed Rudolf Höss as the camp commandant. Inside the old barracks, rebuilt under his command, the SS tested a new procedure in August 1941. Guards locked 600 Soviet prisoners of war and 250 sick Poles inside a sealed basement. Why was Zyklon B needed? The old execution methods simply could not cope with the approved scale of the final solution. Firing squads worked too slowly. They consumed too much ammunition. The camp administration demanded a dry engineering process. Officers dropped the chemical through the ceiling shafts. Hydrocyanic acid vaporized instantly in the dark. The gas aggressively blocked cellular respiration. Victims did not just run out of air, they suffocated from the inside. Cell by cell, the reports reached Berlin. In January 1942, high-ranking officials formalized the total extermination of European Jews at the Wannsee Conference. This scale required a new geography. 2 miles from the main site, engineers broke ground on Auschwitz-Birkenau. The blueprints included massive underground chambers and commercial incinerators. A pure factory of death. The entire infrastructure relied on small blue-gray pellets, Zyklon B. Before the basement experiment, the supply officers purchased these exact granules for only one routine task: exterminating lice in infected clothing. The SS declared the test successful. The Wannsee Conference approved the chemical method that demanded absolute obedience. Panic wasted time. The executioners needed total control, so they engineered an absolute deception. On the ramp, guards asked no questions. A brief glance decided fates. The elderly, pregnant women, and children walked to the left. The strong went to the right. The condemned crowd saw signs promising showers and a routine disinfection. Instead, they faced blank concrete walls and lethal gas. To maintain the illusion, the SS delivered the Zyklon B crystals in vehicles prominently marked with the Red Cross emblem. Inside the antechambers, the calm persisted. People undressed. They folded their clothes neatly. They memorized their exact hook numbers. Guards calmly promised a safe return to the lockers after the disinfection. Officers herded the naked crowd into the final concrete room. Fake shower heads hung from the ceiling. Then came the dull metallic clank of the heavy iron door locking shut. SS men dropped the chemical pellets through small roof vents. The air turned into poison. Victims fought blindly for every single breath. They clawed at the locked doors. They climbed over one another to reach the last pockets of oxygen. The strongest victims died last. They formed a tangled pyramid of torn bodies near the ceiling. It took 15 to 20 minutes for the screaming to stop. This exact sequence of mass murder happened every single day. Once the steel doors went quiet after 20 minutes, the system demanded a cleanup crew. The men sent inside had to erase every trace of the crime. Who operated this final stage of the conveyor? The prisoners themselves. The Sonderkommando. They worked under the absolute certainty of a bullet to the head if they paused. Guards swung the heavy doors open. Industrial fans vented the remaining poison. Inside, victims formed a frantic tower, frozen in a desperate climb for oxygen. The Sonderkommando stepped into the blood. They untangled the stiffened limbs. They sheared the women's hair. They pried open jaws with iron hooks to extract gold teeth. The SS turned murder into resource extraction. Guards melted the pulled gold into neat ingots and shipped it directly to the Reich. They deposited the wealth into a secret Reichsbank account under the fictitious name Max Heiliger. The dead actively financed the SS. Factories spun the sheared hair into industrial felt for military crews. Nothing went to waste. Prisoners dragged the stripped bodies to the massive underground furnaces of crematoria 2, 3, 4, and 5. The brick chimneys roared constantly. A sweet, thick smell of burning flesh blanketed Birkenau. 6,000. The facility incinerated that exact number of corpses every single day at full capacity. To numb the psychological slaughter, the camp administration gave the Sonderkommando extra rations of vodka. The men drank, and they kept feeding the fire. The Nazis designed a perfect, self-erasing loop. Victims disposed of victims. Every few months, the SS executed the entire shift to ensure zero witnesses. Guards shoved the cleaners into the very ovens they had operated. But the absolute silence failed. A few men mapped out the extermination grid. By October 1944, time was running out. The prisoners sealed their handwritten diaries inside glass jars. They buried the evidence deep in the ash-filled soil, right next to the crematoria walls. In October 1944, the sky above the camp ignited. Women from the munitions factory smuggled the explosives piece by piece. The stolen gunpowder tore Crematorium 4 apart, a desperate strike. But this fierce rebellion shattered against the ice-cold bureaucracy of the SS. Guards suppressed the mutiny in hours. Executioners shot the surviving rebels on the spot. The sharp smell of burnt gunpowder settled over the shattered brick walls. The flames of the uprising faded. The system did not even blink. Blood soaked the ground outside the ruins. Inside, SS officers wiped the soot from their boots and returned to their wooden desks. Absolute chaos in the yard. Pedantic routine in the office. The commanders calmly pulled out fresh paperwork. They filled in the arrival times for the next transport trains. They updated the selection charts with perfect handwriting. The true horror of this machine was its flawless order. The Auschwitz garrison housed over 7,000 SS personnel. The vast majority operated exactly like ordinary corporate clerks. Train manifests, timetables, daily quotas. They processed human beings as raw inventory. When the evening sirens sounded, the men shut their ledgers. The officers locked their desk drawers, walked out the main gates, and went home to eat dinner with their children. The bureaucratic machine spared some, only to send them to Auschwitz-Birkenau. Here, survival shrank to bare centimeters. Architects designed the camp's physical space specifically for humiliation. The barracks were simply converted horse stables. Builders originally constructed them to hold 50 animals. Instead, the SS shoved over 700 people into each wooden shell. Inside, 3-tiered bare boards lined the walls. No mattresses, no blankets, just raw timber. Guards packed the inmates so tightly that if one person turned over, the entire row had to shift simultaneously. How do you stay warm in a wooden barrack during winter? The only source of heat was the shivering bodies of your neighbors on the bunks. A piercing, icy draft howled through wide cracks in the roof. Birkenau stood on a swamp. Cold mud seeped upward and swallowed the floors. Rats nested in the shadows. Every inch of the structure suffocated the inmates. The toilets were just another weapon. Latrines consisted of open concrete pits. Hundreds of sick prisoners shared a single block. Camp crews cleared the excrement exactly once a day. Sometimes they ignored the routine entirely. Water for washing did not exist. Lice colonized the timber and the skin. Rampant disease tore through the cramped space. Ultimately, the extreme unsanitary conditions and relentless lice caused the mass loss of the prisoners' hair. Inside these freezing barracks, every morning began with a futile attempt to trick human physiology. Guards distributed the daily rations. First came a metal mug of ersatz coffee. The dark liquid tasted deeply bitter, brewed entirely from wild grass and weeds. At noon, camp staff served a thin, watery soup. Inside floated a single piece of rotten cabbage. Evening brought the final daily meal, a block of black bread. Inmates chewed the stone-hard crust in silence. A healthy adult performing heavy physical labor requires more than 3,000 calories a day. The prisoners received less than 1,000. This massive deficit triggered an irreversible biological collapse. The starving organism began to consume its own tissue. Muscles vanished, fat disappeared. The sheer mathematics of the food ration guaranteed inevitable death. Total physical exhaustion set in within mere weeks. Weakened immune systems completely failed. Typhus and dysentery instantly tore through the wooden tiers. Medical treatment remained an absolute fiction. SS physicians entered the barracks solely to extract living subjects for medical experiments. An organism burning its final 1,000 calories marched directly into 14-hour shifts at Buna Monovitz. How do you survive when the state uses you as a disposable machine part? The Italian chemist Primo Levi found a single answer. Become absolutely invisible. Blend into the concrete. The SS designed this facility in direct partnership with the IG Farben Corporation. They formalized a concept of extermination through labor. Genocide operated as a highly profitable enterprise. Inmates swung heavy pickaxes in the gravel pits under the scorching summer heat. They dragged steel rails for 12 to 14 hours a day. Corporate supervisors monitored the sites, demanding maximum physical output from every starving body. The brutal routine extracted a man's entire remaining lifespan in mere weeks. Levy adapted by establishing a rigid personal rule. Never drink a drop of water in plain sight of the guards. Never draw their eyes for a single second. Any sudden attention guaranteed a fatal beating. Yet this flawless psychological camouflage shattered during the mandatory barrack selections. SS doctors entered the housing blocks without warning. Guards forced every exhausted prisoner to strip completely naked in the center of the room. The physicians paced the silent rows, visually assessing muscle loss and protruding collarbones to calculate a worker's remaining economic value. A swift point of a finger concluded the medical evaluation. The camp administration immediately routed anyone failing this physical inspection to the gas chambers. But even complete invisibility at the Buna Monovitz construction sites offered no shield against the capos on the morning square. Violence dictated every second. SS officers and capos struck without warning. A slow step, a stray glance. Guards beat prisoners out of pure boredom, while capos dragged the bleeding bodies into the dark. They never returned. Every day began at the Appellplatz. The SS never built this vast roll call square for simple arithmetic. They engineered it as a meticulously calculated tool for psychological destruction, a theater of absolute power. Prisoners formed endless lines under the heavy winter snow, waiting for the officers to begin their daily terror. 4 in the morning until sunrise. The rules forbade any movement. If a single person vanished, the counting halted immediately. The entire block stood frozen while the guards searched the barracks. People froze to death right on the spot. Legs gave out. Instead of offering help, the patrolling guards immediately shot anyone who collapsed onto the frozen mud. Survival depended entirely on the collective. A neighbor's failure meant your death. Escapes triggered the ultimate terror. The SS hung recaptured fugitives in front of the silent camp. Corpses dangled for days as a rotting warning. Sometimes the original runaway vanished completely without a trace. The system demanded blood regardless. For every single escapee, the camp administration executed exactly 10. Inmate Olga Lengel survived the women's sector and documented its most clinical routine. By January 1945, Soviet forces were already pushing toward the borders. Yet the methodical system of destroying newborns continued to operate here without a single interruption. What happened to those born in the barracks? Guards took them away right after the first cry. Pregnancy at the selection ramp usually guaranteed a direct path to the gas chambers. Some women hid their condition. They concealed their bellies beneath oversized striped uniforms and eventually went into labor in the damp shadows of the wooden blocks. The guards treated these undocumented arrivals purely as a logistical issue. They wasted no gas. Metal buckets stood ready right on the floor of the barracks. A dull splash of water. Mothers lay paralyzed on the lower bunks and watched the guards drown their children. The camp administration systematically erased the biological future of the prisoners. The right to motherhood ceased to exist. At that same moment, Soviet vanguard units were actively advancing toward the eastern borders. Only 200 children survived out of 3,000. Those who bypassed the metal buckets in the women's barracks found a different reception on the sorting ramp. Dr. Joseph Mengele met them personally. He smiled and promised absolute salvation from the gas chambers. Then he injected pure phenol straight into their beating hearts. In May 1943, the selection ramp became his stage. Mengele scanned the exhausted crowd. A crisp white glove rose. A precise gesture separated the screaming children from their mothers. Guards dragged the chosen victims away. They marched them straight into the concrete walls of Block 10. The doctor weaponized their innocence. He whistled opera melodies. He handed out chocolate bars. The children trusted him. Guards locked the heavy wooden doors, and the cold gleam of a metal measuring compass pressed against a child's temple. Needles drained their blood. Chemicals burned their corneas. 1,500 pairs of twins crossed this threshold. 3,000 children. This number matched the entire population of a standard European town. He performed simultaneous autopsies on the murdered siblings to compare their harvested organs. While Mengele dissected children, Karl Klauberg and Horst Schumann launched an industrial sterilization conveyor in the adjacent blocks. They turned human reproduction into a mechanical target. Men walked into the clinic. They expected a simple medical checkup. Instead, hidden machines blasted their bodies with X-rays. Schumann destroyed their reproductive organs without warning. The intense radiation caused severe burns, and guards subsequently executed the victims just so scientists could extract and study the damaged tissue. Klauberg mirrored this routine in the women's section. He pumped caustic chemicals directly into their wombs. It caused massive internal bleeding. It guaranteed lifelong sterility. Why did the army need data from the camp barracks? The answer lay far away. The Wehrmacht was looking for ways for soldiers to survive in the Soviet snows. The state demanded practical military research. Human bodies became disposable supplies. Camp engineers built specialized freezing rooms. Guards forced naked prisoners into sub-zero temperatures. Medical personnel stood by with stopwatches to document the exact moment of clinical death, fulfilling direct orders from the high command. The Eastern Front required this grim data. German generals urgently needed precise hypothermia protocols to prepare troops for the brutal winter campaigns. Every death inside the ice chamber shaped the new military medical manuals. Other blocks handled combat wounds and field diseases. Scientists deliberately rubbed toxins into open sores. The military demanded rapid tests for new chemical treatments. Camp inmates served purely as biological raw material. The vast medical infrastructure of the camp operated solely to fulfill state defense contracts without any intention of curing the subjects. The rate of complete healing after these experimental procedures remained exactly 0%. On the morning of January 17, 1945, guards dragged the surviving victims of Schumann and Klauberg into the biting frost. The Soviet army was rapidly advancing. The SS rushed to erase the crime scene. Officers tossed camp ledgers into roaring fires. Then came the explosives. A heavy shockwave rattled the empty barracks. In the background, a massive crematorium building detonated and collapsed in a cloud of brick dust. Guards herded the inmates toward the gates. People stood in thin, striped rags, no winter clothing. The march began. Immediately, knees buckled. A dull thud of bodies hitting the frozen snow echoed along the column. 56,000 people walked west without shoes. This endless human chain equaled the exact size of 4 full-strength Wehrmacht infantry divisions. The SS drove this skeletal army on foot toward deep inland camps across Germany and Austria. Guards executed anyone who stopped walking. A bullet for a stumble. A bullet for a pause. The Soviet vanguard pressed forward just miles behind them. Freedom remained literally days away. Yet these exhausted prisoners died on the very edge of liberation, as the SS bought their own escape with thousands of lives. Snow quickly covered those left behind. Those too weak for the winter march stayed behind. They lay in the freezing dark, waiting. On the 27th of January, 1945, the Red Army breached the barbed wire. The soldiers stopped in their tracks. 7,000 living skeletons stared back at them. What remained of the infrastructure after the SS retreated? 7,000 emaciated people and tons of human hair. The stench hit the advancing troops like a physical wall. The smell of burning from blown-up crematoriums mixed with the rotting air of unventilated barracks. Soldiers of the Soviet 60th Army walked through the compound. Combat on the approach was brief. The guards had already fled westward. The liberators found 7,000 survivors, but they found millions of personal items. The scale of the extermination industry revealed itself through objects, not just bodies. Warehouses stood packed to the ceiling with stolen luggage. Mountains of unclaimed suitcases lined the floors. Troops discovered hundreds of thousands of eyeglasses, meticulously sorted baby clothes, massive piles of shoes left without owners. The people who brought them had burned. Only the inventory remained. The retreating commanders tried to hide the slaughter with dynamite. The collapsed concrete roofs of the gas chambers stayed in the frozen mud as documented physical evidence. While 7,000 rescued prisoners were learning to walk again, the world began a global hunt for their tormentors. Allied forces caught Rudolf Höss in 1947. The tribunal tried and hanged him. They placed the gallows right next to his former crematorium, a flawless image of retribution. But the justice system fractured. It crushed the high command and let the ordinary executioners slip away. The timeline then shifted into the long decades of the Cold War. The new geopolitical standoff provided a perfect cover for the fugitives. Hundreds of SS guards, technicians, and camp doctors avoided the tribunals entirely. They did not hide in underground bunkers. They smoothly integrated into the growing medical and administrative systems of post-war Europe. The architects of torture put on clean white coats. They treated patients. They lived quiet lives. Retribution proved highly selective. The industrial machinery of mass murder collapsed, but its operators simply dissolved into the daily crowd. Decades later, survivors brought their testimonies back to the site. Construction crews cleared the remaining debris. They built concrete memorials directly over the shattered foundations of the former camp blocks.